Welcome to episode 8 of Kerusi Panas, Sabah, in this podcast that looks at different dimensions of Sabah politics across different regions and focuses on the hot seats that tell us a lot about various complexities of Sabah politics. Episode 8 is called The Interior Warlords. To begin the conversation, I'd like to talk about an important geographic feature of the interior, that is, Mount Trismati. Mount Trismati is not as well known as Mount Kinabalu. The fact that it's part of the interior is in some ways very telling. Trismati comes from a Dusun word called Ilotusarao, which basically means hunting ground. And the word Madi comes from the man who hunted there. I think this is illustrative because the interior remains a place where people hunt for political power. They hunt for seats to shore up their positions. Disproportionately, most of the candidates, winners and the warlords, are men. The interior region has some interesting dynamism. We've seen some changes in some of the seats because the voter share is usually smaller and the distance much broader. What we see is the importance of very personal dynamics on the ground. There are three features that I'd like to pull out talking about interior politics in Sabah. The first of which is really a no-brainer, and that is the deficit of basic needs. On almost every major indicator, poverty, health, education, social mobility, the interior region of Sabah really is very far behind compared to the rest of Sabah, compared to the rest of Malaysia. To put this in ways that perhaps people cannot fathom outside, there's a celebration when there is an ATM. They're lucky if they have options of restaurants. Access to go to school costs money because the schools are so far at distances. So therefore we see differences in people being left behind. While there are schools in the interior area, they're not necessarily accessible to all. There are pockets where there is lack of connectivity, especially in the northern part of the interior. You see some improvements in the southern part of the interior, but there's still very big gaps. The roads are the main ones, but interior, almost everything is gravel or not gravel. There are very significant deficits in basic needs. I was struck when I visited in the north in a place of Warlords, the town of Paithao. In this town, you can see a lack of electricity, only small measured changes in terms of water, and real significant issues of children stunting, health deficits. To describe the deficit of what's happening in this town to the rest of parts of Sabah is really quite vast. This is what happens when you go off the road into the kampongs on your four-wheel drive to assess and talk to voters in these places that have conditions that are not fit for the 21st century. In fact, I would suggest that some of these places, political shame needs to be addressed. Why these issues of basic needs become important? This is something that is capitalized on in a resource-dependent campaign. Money is extremely influential, and the votes are seen to be bought, not just for transportation, but also because incomes and conditions are very low. And so people are seen to be vote banks in the interior. A second feature of the interior is that you have incumbents and warlords that have been able to capitalize on this. Many of the seats have the same individuals or the same families. The names are well known across parts of the interior. Their family members also emerge as a result. it encourages high levels of elitism between those that have the wealthy and the power and those that do not. You don't see a very large middle class or even large avenues of social mobility in the interior area. Many people have to leave to get jobs, as there are very few jobs, and they rely heavily on areas of agriculture. This has limited potential for many of the families living in these interior, beautiful, majestical areas. A third feature of interior politics is the issue of land. Land rights and land ownership have long been issues in Sabah. In fact, across Malaysian politics, political power is often tied to land grabs, land administration, and land ownership. Many people have settled into these areas or resettled from different communities into the interior, and they've lived on these lands for many years, but in fact, they don't own the titles or the registration to that land. And many parts of the interior areas don't even have access to documents because the document process is often far away. While there have been modest efforts to have more whole bill birth registrations and death registrations, there are still significant gaps. And it spills over into the rights of people in the interior to control their own assets and property and the places they live. These issues collectively, elite power, lack and deficit of basic needs, and the challenges of land, underscore high levels of vulnerability, but they also contribute to the hierarchical pattern of leadership. What makes the interior region interesting is that some of this is changing. We see now more challenges to political power. This process has not begun only in this election. It's begun over the course of a few elections where we're starting to see changes in who dominates the politics in the interior. The 5 hot seats that I'll be focusing on are Melalap, Telupid, Tulid, Lamag, and Sugut. Each of them capture some of these factors that I was speaking about. The first one is Melalap. Many of you may have heard of Melalap because of Peter Anthony, who's now in jail for corruption. But the fact is, he came in as a dusun into an area that was largely Murut. Melalap is a disproportionately Murut constituency. His dynamism and his financial generosity allowed him to woo and win over strong levels of support. In my ground research multiple times visiting Melalap, if Peter Anthony could run from jail, he could win. Melalap itself is part and parcel of the beautiful and historic town, Teno. Anthony gained support by having deliverables, street lamps, trying to address specific problems that people needed, improving sidewalks to schools. So you have these concrete changes. Melalap stands quite starkly having improvements compared to neighboring places like Mabel, also part of the interior region. And his party, KDM, which is now being led by others, became very important in becoming a new political force, as I discussed in the previous episode, the Northern Frontier. Melalap is a contest that has multiple contenders, the first of which is Peter Anthony's daughter, Priscilla Peter. She's running on the sentiment of her father. PKR is fielding a man called Jamawi Jafar. He's trying to appeal towards Muslim voters. He's run local programs for social assistance. He is known for his hopping of many different parties. Even in the last few months, you can see him wearing different political party shirts. The third major contender in this multi-corner race is a man called Junik Bajit, who is a headmaster, recently retired. He taps into his ethnic sentiment of a Muru and his local communities of the Timagong Muru community. There are 29 different subgroups of Muru communities. The Timagong is the most common in Melalap. Across this region, there are so many, including the Tagol, the Palawan, the Pukan. And you can learn about this if you go to the Muru Museum, which is a wonderful museum in Melalap. The other contenders that are worth mentioning is Star's Alviana Linus in terms of potential capacity. Warasan is not very strong in the interior regions. The main other person in this contest is an independent, a man called Gabriel George Tulas, used to be one of the local individuals closely related and working for Peter Anthony. So we can see in some ways a bit of the split in the KDM support. Melalap is a test of whether or not personality and the role of Peter Anthony will continue to have an important role. The warlord that Peter Anthony quickly became, or whether or not the challengers of Jumawi and Junik will be able to undercut that. It'll be interesting to watch. Moving further north is the seat of Tulid. Tulid is a very small constituency in terms of numbers, and it was a constituency that was heavily fought over in the political deal negotiation. The seats was eventually won by PKR, a woman called Rafina Pengaran. She is contesting against local players. The key players to highlight is Star's party, Evaritus Gunkit. This seat also had turnover in the 2020 election from Star, and so this is a battle largely between Star and PKR. And Jordan Elron, son of the long-standing incumbent in the neighboring seat of Suk. It is a 14-corner contest, one of the highest number of candidates in any of the seats, and it's highly personalized. It was seen originally to be a PBRS seat that was going to be contested by Arthur Kurup's party, but he gave up that seat to PPR in the negotiations. What we see on the ground, speaking to voters, is that they talk about the need for basic needs and development. They highlight this as a key core element, similar to that of Melalap. This gives a dynamic where the promises of resources, the access to power, federal government, and people with those types of resources gain an advantage because of the real serious deficit gaps that exist on the ground in a seat like Tulid. Now, moving further north, we have the seat of Telupid. Telupid varies among these different constituencies in that it has more of a town center. It is a town center, having visited over many years, that has grown in intent. In numbers, it's changed in composition. This is a seat that is being contested by 9 different contenders. Essentially, it's coming down to the Christian vote and how it splits and moves, and how the Muslim vote splits this area. The incumbent is a man called Johnny Bolt Kurum from PBS. His main contender is APCO's Felix Joseph Sang. The 2 other contenders that I'm looking in this context are BN's Benedict Asmat. Benedict Asmat was a former district officer, and Johnny Bone PBS's businessman. Felix is also an entrepreneur in the local area. Perkara National is fielding Jamin Jamri. Why I even mention Perkara National in this seat is that this is under the rubric of the Perkara National's only member of parliament, Ronald Candy, who I'll come to in a moment. We're looking at to see how the Muslim vote splits and how the Christian KDM vote splits. What's interesting about this seat is that Johnny Bone, Felix, and Benedict all come from the same village originally, and they're all related, one uncle and two cousins. This is very telling about what we see in Dalaman interior areas, the close personal types of connections. Telupid, comparatively, in many ways is very dynamic because of the town center, and the access to information creates the sense of potential change in this way. So it has similar parallels to what we see in Melalap. Not to be left out are the issues associated with land, and the management of land comes up. Sugut is one of those most poor areas in the interior, and it is where I mentioned earlier is this town of Paitan. But even when you go further in, you can see some of those sharp differences. It's a place where you've had a long-standing warlord, a man called James Ratib, and there are other seats that have warlords, such as Kwamot, such as Plasum Bana, who is the warlord in that area. The seat, what we see is a real intensive, highly personalized feud between James Ratib, who controls a lot of the land. You can see his posters and his stickers all across in what is known as the dynamic of Membomkan, the bombing of resources and the reinforcement of dominance by these warlords against another local warlord, and that is Ronald Candy, who, as I mentioned, is the MP for Belaran. These two men are in very intensive fight. There are no other major players in this seat. It really is a battle between these two men. There's 7 candidates. But it also is very much a tragedy that what we see in Sabah politics is that the real questions about whether or not conditions are going to improve when you have traditional warlords fighting each other, not bringing in new contenders that can fundamentally change or have the resources to win in a seat like this area. And we're talking about millions that are being spent on winning in these interior hunting grounds. Finally, in the interior is the seat of Lamag. Lamag is most well known for its leader, who has been the chairman in UMNO in Sabah, and that is a man called Bung Mokhtar. This contest involves 6 different contenders, and why people are looking at this as a hot seat is that in the last race, in 2020, Bung Mokhtar only managed to win by a small share of votes. This time round, I think he has a buffer because of the splits that existed within GRS, who would have been its largest contender against him. A man called Johaini Zamsa Shamshah Johari. Warson's running a candidate called Safullah Lokman, and we see other individuals from PN, a man Maslin Madali. This is the example of being interior warlord. What differentiates Lamag, however, from some of the other interior zones in places and towns like Bukit Baram is that you actually do see some very concrete improvements, both in terms of the roads, building infrastructure. There are concrete deliverables. Yes, there are significant differences in terms of overall standards of living. You find multiple banks and ATMs in a place like Lamag, and you find lots of restaurants, including some good food. You see increased connectivity. Lamag is one of those areas that you drive through going to Lahadatu. Outside of Lamag are some of the worst roads in Sabah on the way to Lahadatu. This is an area where many parts of the Borneo Highway have not really yet been finalized. But it is a hot seat, and it talks about the role that personality plays in these types of constituencies. Bung Mokhtar's popularity is that he's seen as one of us from the local community. He's seen as being accessible, and all of his language and discourse that many people from outside will be very critical of are seen as part of some person fighting to represent and standing up for his community. Two very different perceptions about how and why Bung Mokhtar still continues to play an important role. It'll be interesting to see whether or not he manages to extend his margin. So in these interior seats, Lamag, Melalap, Tulid, Telupid, Sugut, we have very interesting sets of stories. But where these warlords get their money, where the issues are affecting ordinary people in terms of services and land, still are very much spoken about. There are many stories, multiple generations, and legacy issues in these communities. There are other interior seats that I've followed closely, Banmod and Suk, just to name a few, and also the resource-heavy places of places like Nabawan, which is also similar to Sugu, very remote seat. But these constituencies speak to the fact that the interior remains a hunting ground for wealth, a hunting ground for political votes and vote banks, and a hunting ground for political power. Hopefully, in this hunt, there will be more changes and more new pressures to deliver more concrete results. Some of the incumbents have been yielding results, concrete deliverables. You can see changes that have been happening in the last 5 years. Some of the younger generations, people like Arthur Kurup, who is contesting in Suk, will actually be able to push some of these issues further. Many of these constituencies have among the more poorer communities, such as the Murut in Melalap. Hope these seats will bring about positive transformations in these elections by garnering greater attention. I'm not so hopeful that these changes will come quickly because the roles of these reinforcing areas of vulnerability, power elites, and politics play a very vicious cycle in these interior areas. It's one that is slowly breaking, but will take time to change fundamentally. Thanks for listening to Kerusi Panas, Episode 8. We'll continue the conversations.